Every story begins with a dream, and every tragedy begins when that dream becomes an obsession. Dorian Gray once wanted only one thing: to remain young forever, to preserve his beauty, to escape the cruelty of time. And somehow his wish came true. But some wishes are not gifts. They are traps. And Dorian was finally about to understand the difference. The attic stood silent. Dust floated through the darkness. And before the horrifying portrait, Basil Hallward stood frozen, unable to look away, unable to understand what he was seeing. The painting had become a nightmare. Every sin, every cruelty, every corruption, written across its face. "Dorian," Basil whispered, "what have you done?" The words pierced deeper than any accusation. Because Basil wasn't angry. He was heartbroken. He still believed Dorian could be saved. Even now, even after seeing the monster inside the portrait. "Pray, Dorian. Ask for forgiveness. Change before it's too late." For a brief moment, Dorian almost listened. Almost. But then he looked at the portrait, and all he saw was judgment, condemnation, truth. And suddenly, anger replaced shame. Years of guilt, years of fear, years of self-hatred exploded at once. And in a single terrible moment, Dorian committed the darkest act of his life. The moment that ensured there could never be a return. The moment that transformed corruption into destruction. When it was over, the attic felt colder, emptier, dead. Dorian stared at what he had done, and for the first time, even he was afraid of himself. The portrait changed again. Its face became even more horrifying, more monstrous. As though the canvas itself recoiled from what had happened. And Dorian finally understood something. The portrait was not punishing him. The portrait was telling the truth. A truth he spent years trying to escape. But instead of facing it, he chose concealment again and again and again. Days became weeks. Weeks became months, and Dorian's secret grew heavier. Every knock at the door startled him. Every stranger felt suspicious. Every shadow seemed alive. The freedom he once celebrated had become a prison. Because guilt is strange. It does not disappear when ignored. It waits patiently, in silence, growing stronger. Dorian returned to pleasure, to parties, to luxury, to distraction. But nothing worked anymore. The music felt empty. The laughter felt false. The beauty felt meaningless. Because once you see your soul clearly, it becomes impossible to forget. And every night, the portrait waited, watching, remembering, judging. Years earlier, Dorian believed beauty would bring happiness. But now, he possessed everything: youth, wealth, status, freedom. And still, he was miserable. Because happiness was never what he wanted. He wanted escape. And escape is never enough. Eventually, a new idea entered his mind. Perhaps it wasn't too late. Perhaps redemption was still possible. Perhaps he could become a better man. For the first time in years, hope returned. Dorian began imagining a different future. A future without lies, without secrets, without fear. Maybe if he changed his life, the portrait would change too. Maybe goodness could erase corruption. Maybe the damage could still be undone. So he tried. Or at least, he tried to believe he was trying. But true redemption is difficult because it requires honesty. And Dorian still feared the truth. Dorian began imagining a different future. A future without lies, without secrets, without fear. Maybe if he changed his life, the portrait would change too. Maybe goodness could erase corruption. Maybe the damage could still be undone. So he tried. Or at least, He tried to believe he was trying. But true redemption is difficult because it requires honesty. And Dorian still feared the truth. One night, he climbed the attic stairs again. The same stairs, the same room, the same nightmare. And there stood the portrait, more terrifying than ever. Its eyes seemed alive, its face twisted by years of hidden sins, its expression filled with cruelty. Dorian stared, waiting for evidence of improvement, waiting for proof that he had changed. But the portrait remained unchanged. Because the canvas understood something Dorian did not. Good actions performed for selfish reasons are not goodness at all. And suddenly, rage returned. Years of fear, years of guilt, years of regret exploded once more. The portrait had stolen everything: his peace, his innocence, his happiness, his soul. Or so he believed. In truth, the portrait had stolen nothing. It merely reflected what already existed. But Dorian refused to accept that. And so, he made one final decision, one final desperate choice. If the portrait was the source of his suffering, then he would destroy it forever. He grabbed a blade, the same blade connected to his darkest memories, the same blade that symbolized everything he wished to forget. The storm outside intensified. Lightning flashed across the attic walls. The portrait seemed to stare directly into him, as if it knew what was coming, and perhaps it did. Dorian raised the blade. His hands trembled, not with fear, with desperation. For years, he had run from truth. For years, he had hidden from consequences. For years, he had tried to separate himself from his own soul. Now, he believed destruction would finally set him free. He was wrong. The blade came down, and a terrible cry echoed through the house, a cry filled with pain, with terror, with finality. Then, silence, complete silence. Servants rushed toward the attic. The door was locked. The room was silent. Eventually, they forced their way inside. And what they found would haunt them forever. The portrait stood beautiful, perfect, untouched, exactly as it had appeared many years ago, young, innocent, radiant. But on the floor lay the body of an old man, wrinkled, disfigured, unrecognizable, a face by corruption, by sin. Only the rings on his fingers revealed the truth. It was Dorian Gray. The curse was over. The illusion had ended. The truth had finally won. Because no matter how far we run, we never escape ourselves. Time cannot be cheated forever. Consequences cannot be avoided forever. And a soul cannot be hidden forever. Eventually, the bill arrives. And when it does, it demands everything. Perhaps that is why Dorian Gray remains unforgettable. Not because he was evil, not because he was beautiful, but because he was human. He wanted what many people secretly want: endless youth, endless pleasure, a life without consequences. And his story reminds us why such dreams are dangerous, because beauty fades, pleasure fades, power fades, but character remains. And in the end, the person we become matters far more than the face we wear. You have been listening to The Picture of Dorian Gray, final chapter, The Fall of a Beautiful Soul. And here at NOIIR, we explore stories about obsession, human nature, dreams, regret, and the hidden truths that shape our lives. Because some stories are not meant to be remembered, they are meant to be felt. Until next time, good night.